Libra, pause for a moment, because the energy coming through at the beginning of this month feels incredibly emotional. I feel like there's someone who has been thinking about you far more than they let on. They keep looking back on what happened between the two of you, revisiting their choices, and quietly wondering whether they underestimated this connection. What's really weighing on their mind isn't only what may have been lost along the way. It's also the person you've become. They see your growth. They see your calmness. They see the way you've continued moving forward, even when you didn't receive everything you deserved. And honestly, that stays with them. There's regret here. There are things they wish had been said sooner, feelings that perhaps should have been expressed more openly. And the more they reflect on everything, the more they seem to realize that this distance has changed the way they see the entire situation. Wow. I also feel like there's a transformation happening within this person. They're trying to understand themselves on a deeper level, trying to heal old fears, trying to face emotions they've spent a long time avoiding. So stay connected to your intuition. Take what resonates with your journey and gently leave the rest behind, because someone still carries your presence in their thoughts. And little by little, it feels like they're beginning to understand the true significance of this connection. Okay, let's step into your beginning of the month reading, Libra. I honestly get the feeling that this person spent a long time trying to convince themselves they were okay with the distance between the two of you. They tried to keep moving forward with their life. They focused on what was right in front of them. They kept themselves busy. They tried not to think too much about everything that happened. But here's the thing. The harder they tried to do that, the clearer a certain part of their emotions seemed to become. The Lover's card comes through right away as a reminder that this isn't a connection they've been able to simply forget. And what's standing out to me here isn't just attraction. It's not just a passing feeling. This person seems to be looking back at the entire journey you've shared and realizing that this connection left a much deeper mark on them than they ever admitted before. What's interesting is that there may have been a time when they thought all of this would be easier. Maybe they believed time would naturally fade the emotions. Maybe they thought distance would slowly guide both of you towards separate paths. But wow, that doesn't seem to be what happened. Every time a familiar memory surfaces, every time they hear an old song, pass a place that reminds them of the past, or think about a conversation the two of you once had, the feelings seem to find their way back. The Six of Cups card carries such a strong sense of nostalgia here. And honestly, I don't think they miss you only as someone they once cared about deeply. They miss how they felt when they were around you. They miss being able to be themselves. They miss moments that may have seemed ordinary at the time, but somehow became incredibly meaningful in hindsight. Because sometimes what stays with us isn't the big event. It's the way someone listened, the way someone made us feel understood, or simply the sense of peace that appeared whenever that person was near. And okay, I really feel like that's what's happening here. This person is beginning to realize that you brought something into their life that has been difficult to find anywhere else. Then the Justice card appears, and this feels like a process of facing the truth. Not through judgment, not through blame, but through honest reflection. It's as if they're reviewing everything that happened between the two of you from a different perspective now, no longer seeing the story only through their own eyes. There were things they overlooked, feelings they tried to explain away with logic, periods of time when they genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. But looking back now, they're beginning to understand why this distance still affects them the way it does. And honestly, the awakening I'm sensing here feels very quiet, very gradual, not dramatic, not explosive. It's more like someone slowly opening their eyes after spending a long time trying not to look directly at what they truly feel. And because of that, they find themselves thinking about you more often, not in an obsessive way, not in an unhealthy way, but in the way someone tries to understand why their heart still seems connected to the same place after all this time. The Four of Pentacles card tells me they're still holding a lot inside. On the outside, they may say very little. They may continue keeping their distance. They may appear completely normal to everyone around them. But internally, they're carrying far more than most people realize. There are words that were never spoken, questions that were never answered, feelings that never found their way into the open. And honestly, I think what surprises them most is the fact that those feelings are still here. They didn't disappear. They didn't fade away the way they expected. They remained quietly resting in a place deep within their heart. And that's why, even while life continues moving forward, even while everything on the surface appears normal, there are still moments when thoughts of you suddenly appear. Not because they're trying to think about you, but because the memory of you seems to have become part of their emotional world without them fully realizing it. And as those thoughts begin showing up more and more often, another question quietly starts forming in their mind. A very important one. Are these feelings simply nostalgia, or is there something even deeper here that they haven't fully allowed themselves to face yet? And honestly, I feel like this person has spent a lot of time searching for answers outside of themselves. But the farther they've gone, the more they seem to realize that what they're truly trying to understand has been living inside them all along. The Hermit card comes through with a very unique energy. And wow, this doesn't feel like loneliness in a negative sense. It doesn't feel like being left behind. It feels more like someone intentionally stepping away from the noise for a while, pulling back from distractions, creating enough space to finally listen to the things they've been avoiding for a very long time. I really feel like they're moving through a period like that right now. There are moments when they find themselves asking difficult questions. Why did I react that way? Why do I tend to pull away when feelings start becoming deeper? Why does a meaningful connection sometimes make me anxious instead of making me feel safe? And honestly, those questions didn't appear overnight. They seem to have emerged from countless quiet moments of reflection that nobody else ever saw. The Four of Swords card appears here, and I feel like this silence is serving a purpose. Because sometimes we assume silence automatically means distance. But in this energy, silence feels more like a quiet room where someone can no longer keep running from themselves. This person seems to be reflecting on a lot, not only the connection with you, but old experiences, old wounds, old beliefs they've carried for years. There's a feeling that they've become very accustomed to managing emotions by keeping everything inside, keeping thoughts locked away, handling everything alone, never saying too much, never revealing too much. But as they continue growing emotionally, they're beginning to realize that not everything can be solved through silence. Some emotions become heavier when they're never expressed. Some thoughts become louder when they're constantly pushed down. And then the Justice card appears again, which feels incredibly significant. Because once again, this card is bringing attention back to truth. Not somebody else's truth, not a truth imposed by the outside world, but a truth they're slowly beginning to admit to themselves. I feel like they're trying to look at everything more fairly now. There were things they once believed they were right about, choices that seemed completely reasonable at the time, decisions they defended for a long while. But time has a way of changing perspective. And as that perspective shifts, they're starting to notice emotional layers they previously overlooked. They're beginning to understand why certain memories still affect them so deeply. They're beginning to understand why some feelings never fully disappeared. And perhaps, most importantly, they're beginning to realize that not all hesitation comes from logic. Sometimes it comes from fear. And that's exactly where the Eight of Swords card enters the reading. What's interesting is that I don't feel like this person is trapped by circumstances. I feel like they're trapped by their own thoughts. Almost as if there's a voice inside them that keeps asking questions. What if I open up? What if I get hurt? What if things don't go the way I hope? What if I'm not enough? Those questions may never be spoken aloud, but they're there, quietly influencing the choices this person makes, quietly shaping the way they approach vulnerability, quietly encouraging them to stay in familiar territory even when part of them wants something more. But here's the thing, they're beginning to recognize those fears for what they are. They're no longer viewing them as absolute truths. They're no longer treating them as the only reason to remain stuck. And honestly, that's a very important shift. Not a fast one, not a dramatic one, a slow one, a quiet one, but an important one nonetheless. Because when someone begins to understand what's truly been holding them back, they also begin to hear what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. And the clearer that inner voice becomes, the harder it is to ignore the feelings that are slowly rising to the surface. And honestly, there's something really interesting happening within this energy. Because when people begin removing the layers of protection they've built around themselves, they often start seeing everything differently. Not because the world has changed, but because the way they look at the world has changed. And wow, I feel like that's exactly what's happening here. Over this period of time, this person seems to have invested a lot of energy into understanding themselves. And the more they understand themselves, the more they seem to understand your role in their life. The Star card comes through with the feeling of realization, not a dramatic realization, not a sudden breakthrough. It's more like a small light appearing in a dark room. At first, it's barely noticeable. Then, little by little, it becomes clearer. This person is beginning to recognize that your presence affected them far more deeply than they once realized. Because maybe before they were focused on the difficulties, the distance, the unresolved issues, the things that felt complicated. But now they're noticing something entirely different. They're noticing the way you inspired them, the way you encouraged them to become a better version of themselves. You know, some people enter our lives and leave us with beautiful memories. But some people leave us seeing ourselves differently. And honestly, I feel like that's where you exist in this person's heart. They don't only miss you. They miss who they were when they were with you. And that's a very meaningful realization. Then the Temperance card appears with such a gentle, healing energy. And what's interesting is that they're beginning to understand that many of the things they search for outside themselves seem to appear naturally whenever they were close to your energy. Peace, balance, the comfort of simply being themselves, not having to prove anything, not having to perform, not having to become someone else in order to be accepted, just being present and okay. I feel like this realization has been making them think quite a lot, because it's not every day that we meet someone who makes our heart feel safe in that way. Sometimes it takes many different experiences, many different lessons, before we recognize the value of something we once took for granted. The Queen of Cups card comes through showing a deepening sense of appreciation, not only for what you've done, but for who you are. There's something incredibly gentle in the way this person thinks about you. I feel like they see you as someone who understood things they struggled to put into words, someone who sensed emotions they often tried to hide. Maybe they've never actually said this. Maybe they wouldn't even know how to explain it if they tried. But deep down, there seems to be a feeling that you saw parts of them that very few people ever get to see. The vulnerable parts, the honest parts, the parts hidden behind the walls they spent years building. And instead of judging those parts, you seem to meet them with understanding, with compassion. And honestly, that left a lasting impression. Then we arrive at the Ace of Cups card. And this feels like an emotional doorway slowly opening, not impulsive energy. Not feelings that appear one day and disappear the next. If anything, it feels like a stream that has existed beneath the surface for a very long time, but is only now beginning to be acknowledged. This person seems to be realizing that what exists between the two of you is more complex than they once believed. It's not only attraction, it's not only familiarity, it's not only shared memories. There seems to be something deeper flowing underneath all of those things. And the more emotionally mature they become, the harder it becomes to dismiss what their heart is trying to tell them. But here's the part that feels especially important. When someone begins recognizing the true value of a connection, they often start recognizing the things in their life that no longer fit as well. The habits, the fears, the patterns, the parts of themselves they've outgrown. And it feels like that awareness is quietly creating changes inside them that are much bigger than they first appear. And honestly, there's something really interesting happening within this energy. Because when people begin taking down the walls they've built around themselves, they often start seeing things very differently than they once did. Not because the world suddenly changes, but because their perspective changes. And wow, I feel like that's exactly what's happening here. Over this period of time, this person seems to have spent a lot of energy trying to understand themselves. And the more they understand themselves, the more they seem to understand your role in their life. The Star card comes through with a feeling of realization. Not the kind that's dramatic. Not the kind that arrives all at once. It's more like a small light slowly appearing in a dark room. At first, it's faint, almost easy to miss, but little by little, it becomes brighter, clearer. This person is beginning to realize that your presence affected them much more deeply than they once believed. Because maybe before, their attention was focused on the difficulties, the distance, the things that felt unresolved, the things that seemed complicated. But now they're seeing a different side of the story. They're seeing the way you inspired them, the way you encouraged them to become a better version of themselves. You know, some people enter our lives and leave us with beautiful memories. But there are other people who change the way we see ourselves entirely. And honestly, I feel like you belong to that second group in this person's mind. They don't just miss you. They miss who they were when they were with you. And that's a much deeper feeling than it may seem at first. Then the Temperance card appears with such a gentle, healing energy. This person is beginning to understand that many of the things they spent so much time searching for outside themselves seem to appear naturally whenever they were around your energy. Peace, balance, comfort, the ability to simply be themselves without having to prove anything, without having to become someone else. without having to perform, just being present. And okay, I feel like that realization has been sitting with them for a while. Because it's not every day that someone makes your heart feel safe in that way. Sometimes we have to move through many different experiences before we fully recognize the value of something we once took for granted. The Queen of Cups card comes through showing a growing sense of appreciation, not only for what you've done, but for who you are. There's something very gentle about the way they think of you. I feel like they see you as someone who understood things they struggled to express, someone who sensed emotions they often tried to hide. Maybe they've never said that out loud. Maybe they wouldn't even know how to put it into words. But deep inside, there seems to be a feeling that you saw parts of them that very few people ever get to see. The honest parts, the vulnerable parts, the parts hidden beneath years of protection. And instead of judging those parts, you met them with understanding, with compassion. And wow, that left a much deeper mark than they may have realized at the time. Then the Ace of Cups card appears near the end of this energy, and it feels like an emotional doorway slowly opening. This doesn't feel impulsive, it doesn't feel temporary. If anything, it feels like a stream that's been flowing beneath the surface for a very long time and is only now beginning to be acknowledged. This person is starting to understand that the connection between the two of you may be more layered than they originally thought. It's not only attraction, it's not only familiarity, it's not only shared memories. There seems to be something deeper beneath all of those things. And the more emotionally mature they become, the harder it becomes to dismiss what their heart is trying to show them. What's especially interesting is that when someone begins recognizing the true value of a connection, they also begin recognizing the things in their life that no longer fit, the fears, the habits, the patterns, the beliefs they've carried for years. And honestly, it feels like that awareness is quietly creating changes within them that are much bigger than they first appear. And honestly, I feel like this is where some of their deepest fears begin to surface. These aren't questions about circumstances anymore. They're not focused on outside explanations. This feels much more personal than that. These are the kinds of feelings they rarely admit to anyone, maybe not even to themselves. The Nine of Swords card comes through, showing just how much is happening beneath the surface when nobody is watching. This is the kind of energy that shows up when someone's body is still, but their mind refuses to rest. They think about what happened. They think about the choices they made. They think about the words that were never spoken. And sometimes, they wonder whether things might have unfolded differently if they had chosen another path. What's interesting is that I don't feel despair here, I feel regret. The kind of regret that arrives when distance brings clarity. The kind of regret that appears when someone finally recognizes the value of something, after it's no longer a constant presence in their daily life. And honestly, it feels like these thoughts have been showing up more often than they'd like to admit. Then the Five of Cups card appears, and wow, this card carries a very emotional energy. Because I get the feeling they're looking at what was lost, rather than what still remains. Not because they want to stay stuck there, but because their heart is still trying to process emotions that were never fully resolved. Sometimes they think about conversations that never happened, opportunities that slipped away, moments when they chose silence instead of honesty. And the more they reflect, the more they realize some of those moments mattered far more than they understood at the time. I also sense a quiet fear underneath all of this, a fear that time keeps moving forward, a fear that your life continues moving ahead, that you're learning how to become stronger, more peaceful, more secure within yourself. And while part of them genuinely admires that, another part of them feels uncertain, because they don't know whether they still hold a place in your emotional world. The Page of Swords card appears here as a sign of observation. It feels like they've continued paying attention to you in their own way, not necessarily through action. Not necessarily through communication. More like someone who quietly wonders how another person is doing. Are they okay? Are they happy? Do they ever think about me anymore? And honestly, sometimes I feel like they create entire scenarios in their mind. Part of them believes you've already moved on. Another part feels like there's still something about this connection that hasn't fully reached its conclusion. And that inner conflict keeps them thinking, keeps them questioning, keeps them returning to the same feelings again and again. What's really interesting is that the more they observe, the more they realize they aren't nearly as unaffected as they once tried to appear. Some feelings are still there. Some emotions never completely disappeared. Some parts of this story were never truly left behind. They were simply placed on a shelf for a while. Then the Seven of Wands card comes through. And this feels like an internal battle, not a battle with another person, A battle between fear and truth. One side wants protection, wants distance, wants the safety of staying behind familiar walls, wants to avoid potential hurt. But another side is becoming increasingly honest about what it feels, increasingly honest about what matters. And honestly, I feel like this person is trying to move beyond emotional defenses they've carried for a very long time. That's not easy, because those walls weren't built overnight. They're often built from old disappointments, old fears, old wounds, old experiences. But at the same time, I think they're becoming tired of living behind those walls, tired of carrying everything alone, tired of pretending certain things don't matter, tired of acting as though their feelings are less important than they truly are. And as small cracks begin appearing in those defenses, there's one thing that becomes harder and harder for them to deny. Behind all the worry, all the regret, all the unanswered questions, there still seems to be a very genuine desire. A desire to understand what truly matters to their heart. Before this distance becomes something they can only look back on and wonder about. Before the opportunity to fully understand the meaning of this connection becomes nothing more than another unanswered question. And from that point forward, the energy begins to shift. Because this no longer feels like someone simply going in circles inside their own mind. It no longer feels like emotions hidden behind layer after layer of protection. Honestly, I feel like they're moving into something much more practical now. A stage where they're beginning to ask themselves a different question. Not what they're feeling, but what they want to do with those feelings. The Ace of Pentacles card comes through with a very grounded energy. This is the card of opportunities that can actually take shape in the real world, not distant dreams, not emotions that exist only in imagination, but the desire to turn something into reality. And wow, I feel like this person has been thinking a lot about how to close the gap between what they feel inside and what they show on the outside. Now, they may not have every answer yet. They may still be sorting through certain things, but there seems to be a level of seriousness here that wasn't quite visible before. The Six of Pentacles card brings in the theme of balance, and honestly, this feels incredibly important right now, because they're beginning to look at this connection through a more mature lens. Not only thinking about what they wanted, not only seeing things from their own perspective, they're starting to think about your experience too. What you've gone through, what you've given, what may not have been returned in the way you deserved. And I really feel a growing sense of empathy here, a willingness to understand rather than defend. A willingness to look honestly instead of looking away. That's why it feels like they're no longer interested in avoiding unfinished parts of the story. There's a desire to understand things more clearly, to look at reality instead of fear, to understand whether something more balanced could exist if both people were willing to see things differently. Then the Wheel of Fortune card appears. And this feels less like a sudden change and more like the result of a long internal journey, almost as if everything they've experienced has been quietly guiding them toward a new crossroads. Not because anyone pushed them there, not because they were forced, but because they've changed. And when awareness changes, the future begins to look different too. Things that once made them hesitate don't seem as powerful anymore. Things that once frightened them are now being viewed through a different perspective. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons they're thinking more seriously about using their voice. The Lover's card appears once again as a reminder of what's been sitting at the center of this entire reading. Because despite the distance, despite the silence, despite all the emotional loops they've gone through, the feelings connected to this bond don't seem easy for them to dismiss. What's interesting is that I don't feel an energy of wanting to go backward. This isn't about trying to relive the past. It feels more like someone trying to understand how to move forward with greater honesty than before. Then the Four of Wands card comes through with such a warm energy. This card carries the feeling of connection, harmony, shared understanding. And honestly, I don't think they're being drawn toward anything superficial anymore. What seems important to them now is the feeling of being understood, being able to share space with someone emotionally, being able to exist in a connection where both people feel seen. There's something comforting here. Almost like after a very long period of questioning everything, they're remembering the sense of peace this connection once brought into their life. Not excitement for the sake of excitement, not temporary intensity, but a feeling of belonging, a feeling of being able to relax into who they truly are. And then we arrive at the World card. And wow, I've always felt that the World card carries the energy of standing at the edge of an ending and a beginning at the same time. This person doesn't seem to be looking at life through the same eyes they once had. They've learned something. They've understood something, They've discovered something within themselves that wasn't visible before. And honestly, what feels most significant isn't the distance between the two of you anymore. It's the value of the connection that still seems to exist despite that distance. Because deep within them, a very strong desire appears to be growing. Not the desire to run away from their emotions, not the desire to postpone things forever, but the desire to bring clarity to what remains unfinished. So their heart no longer has to keep wondering what might have happened if they had been brave enough to be honest about what they truly felt. And honestly, I think that's what stands out most in this entire reading. Not the distance, not the silence, not even the things that were left unsaid. It's the way both people seem to have changed throughout this journey. Some feelings that were once pushed aside are now being seen more clearly. Some truths that were hidden beneath fear are slowly being acknowledged. And there are things within this person's heart that no longer seem as easy to ignore as they once were. No matter what path each person is walking, I feel like this reading speaks deeply about emotional growth, about recognizing the value of a connection after periods of silence, about learning to listen to your heart instead of listening only to fear. And sometimes, it's those seasons without answers that help us understand what truly matters. If today's message resonated with you, take what feels aligned with your journey and gently let the rest go. Thank you so much for spending this time here with me. You truly mean a lot to me. And honestly, I'm deeply grateful for every single one of you who chooses to spend a little part of your day here. I'll see you again in the next reading. Until then, be gentle with yourself. Take good care of your heart and keep moving forward in the way that feels right for you. Okay, take care, Libra. And as always, thank you for being here. Bye for now.